You ever see those headlines, the ones that are like, AI is 90% accurate? And you're like, yeah, 90%, but what does that even mean? Like, do I understand that? Today, we're going to like really, really get into it, like down to the nitty gritty of what binary classification really is.
Yeah.
We're not just talking about getting it right. We're talking about all the ways you can get it wrong.
Yeah. And it gets really interesting when you start thinking about all those little nuances, right? Like a single percentage point off, depending on what you're talking about, could be huge.
Absolutely. And to help us navigate this world, we've got this awesome research paper by Girl Canbeck, and they created this tool. It's called TasKar. And it's basically like a decoder ring for all those performance metrics people throw around when they're evaluating these binary classification models.
Yeah.
It's going to be awesome.
Yeah, it's really cool stuff.
So to decode all of this, we need to start with what's called the confusion matrix.
Which the name is a little scarier than it actually is.
I was going to say, don't let the name scare you, because
Oh.
it's really not that complicated.
It's not. It's really not.
It's literally like a grid, 4 boxes.
Yep.
And each of those boxes represents a different outcome from your AI's prediction. So let's make this real. Let's say you've got a spam filter.
Okay.
One box, you've got those emails that, boom, nailed it, correctly identified as spam. Those are your true positives.
And then you have, on the flip side, when the email you actually want comes through safely in your inbox, no drama, those are your true negatives.
Yes.
It's like, thank goodness.
I know, right? But then it gets a little more like nuanced because we have false positives. So that's when like your important work email gets tossed in the spam.
And then you have those, for a spam filter, at least those spam messages that snuck through, they got they got past your filter and now they're in your inbox. Those are your false negatives.
And this is something that I really appreciated about Canbeck's paper, is that they highlight how the importance of those false positives and false negatives like completely change depending on what you're using the AI for.
Oh, absolutely. A false positive in your spam filter, it's annoying. But imagine a false positive in a medical diagnosis. That's going to have much more serious consequences,
Oh,
right?
absolutely.
Because if you get a test back and it says that you have something and you don't, well, that's a false positive. And that could lead to further unnecessary tests, maybe even treatment that you don't even need. Stress, anxiety, all that stuff.
Right. So we're already starting to see how understanding these boxes in our confusion matrix is super important, right?
Yeah.
And the cool thing is Canbeck doesn't just leave us staring at these boxes trying to visualize all of this in our heads, right? They actually created like a whole system.
Yeah, they did. They did. And they have this really intuitive color coding system that really helps visualize the relationships between all these different measures.
Yeah, and it's great. It's like reds and greens for the different classes, red for spam, green for not spam. It's like really straightforward.
It makes it so much easier visually to grasp what you're actually looking at.
It's like we've got all the ingredients now, right? We've got our 4 boxes. And from that, we can make all kinds of like interesting dishes, each one telling us something a little different about how our AI is actually performing.
Yeah, it's like having a menu, right? Like you go to a restaurant, some things on the menu are going to appeal to you, some things aren't. It depends what you're looking for.
Okay, so what's on the menu? Like what are some of the key metrics we should be paying attention to here? What are these things actually telling us about how well the AI is doing?
So one of the big ones you'll hear a lot is precision. And that's basically like, out of all the times the AI said positive, how many times was it actually right?
So for our spam filter, that means like high precision means very few of those legitimate emails are ending up in the spam folder, right? Which is what you want.
Right. You don't want to be missing those important emails because your filter is a little overzealous.
Exactly. Okay, what else we got? What else is like on this menu?
So then you've got recall, which is kind of the flip side. And recall is all about like how well is it capturing all of the actual positives. So for our spam filter, high recall means it's catching pretty much every spam message out there.
So ideally you want both, right? You want high precision, high recall. You want it to be accurate when it makes those positive predictions, and you want it to be catching as many of the actual positives as possible.
Right. You want to be thorough, but you also want to be accurate.
Okay, but it sounds like it might not always be that simple.
Yeah, unfortunately not. Sometimes you might have to prioritize one over the other, depending on what you're using the AI for.
Oh, that is interesting. And that's something that Canbeck illustrates really well in the paper, actually, right? Like they talk about diagnosing COVID-19 from medical scans.
Yeah, great example. In a situation like that, you really want to minimize those false negatives,
Mm.
even if it means maybe you're going to get a few more false positives.
Because a false negative, in that case, means you're sending someone home who might actually have the virus.
Exactly. Whereas a false positive, you know, not ideal, but it's probably going to lead to further testing. You're going to catch it eventually.
So the stakes are a little bit higher than just like, a spam email slipping through.
A little bit, yeah. And that's where, a tool like TasKar can be super helpful
Mm.
because it helps you visualize those trade-offs and make those decisions based on like what really matters for that specific application.
Mm. Yes, and that's what I was so excited to dig into. And one of the things I loved about the paper is they actually show you how TasKar does this, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure. Like it doesn't just calculate these things for you, it helps you understand them, which I think is so cool.
Yeah. There's this one graphic, I think it was graphic 3 that I thought was brilliant, where it shows you like how balanced the model is, like at a
Oh,
glance.
yeah, I love that graphic. It's so simple, but it's so effective.
Tell us about it. Paint us a picture. What are we looking at?
Okay, so picture this. You've got two circles, right? One for each class. So in our case, it would be like spam, not spam.
Okay.
And the size of each circle represents how much data you have for each class. So you
Yeah.
can immediately see if you've got like a lopsided situation.
So if one circle is huge and the other one's tiny, that's a red flag.
Exactly. Like, whoa, hold on. We've got an imbalance here. We got to deal with that.
Right.
And then on top of that, they overlay those circles with the model's performance.
Okay, so you can see like, is it better at predicting one class over the other?
Exactly. You could have a model that seems really accurate overall, but it's actually terrible at predicting one of your classes.
Okay, that is powerful. That's really, really cool.
Yeah, you don't want to be caught off guard.
No,
Yeah.
this is exactly why I wanted to do this deep dive, because it's so easy to get caught up in those headlines, right? Like, oh, this AI is 90% accurate, but there's all this nuance.
It's like looking at a house, right? Like, well, that's a beautiful house from the outside, but then you get inside and like the plumbing's a disaster. You don't know until you look deeper.
Exactly. And that's what I love about this. It's like they're giving you the tools to actually look deeper.
Mm.
But it's not just about the tools. It's like once you have the tools, what do you do with them?
Right, right. It's about the understanding.
Yeah.
And speaking of understanding, there's this other anecdote I love from the paper, and it talks about how, like, looking at these multiple metrics, it can reveal these situations where the model might look really good on paper, but it's not actually all that impressive.
Okay, so they're showing us all this stuff, these metrics, these visualizations, and how some AIs might not be as good as they seem. How do they actually do that?
So they had this one example in the paper, and it was this model that had, like, super high accuracy.
Yeah.
Like, on the surface, you're like, wow, this thing's amazing.
Yeah, totally.
But then they start looking at this other metric, and it's called the Matthews correlation coefficient.
Okay, hold on. Back up. Another metric. What is this one?
This one's cool. It basically gives you like a much more balanced view of the performance, especially when you're dealing with these data sets that are like, a little uneven.
Like those lopsided circles we were talking about with graphic 3.
Exactly. Like it cuts through all the noise and it tells you how well the model's really understanding like the connections in your data. And in this case, like the Matthews correlation coefficient, it basically showed like a hidden bias, right?
Yeah.
In the model's predictions that even though it had high accuracy, it was kind of misleading.
Oh, wow. It's
Yeah.
like it was trying to like cherry pick the data to make it look good or something.
Yeah. And that's the danger of like only looking at accuracy.
Right.
It's like it's just one piece of the puzzle.
It's like judging that book by its cover.
Exactly. You got to open it up, see what's inside. Look at the Matthews correlation coefficient.
This is why I love these deep dives. It's like we're not just reading headlines, we're actually like understanding this stuff, like really getting into it, and hopefully like arming our listeners with, the information they need to like actually go out and understand this crazy AI world that we're living in.
Totally. Be empowered, right? Like don't be intimidated by it. You can understand this stuff.
So, if there's one thing you want our listeners to take away from today's conversation, what would it be?
I would say anytime you see a headline, new AI, 90% accurate, whatever it is, just remember that number doesn't tell you everything. Don't be afraid to like dig a little deeper. Ask about these other metrics, like maybe drop the Matthews correlation coefficient in there, see what they say, but also like think about the context. What's it being used for? What are the consequences of getting it wrong?
Because as we learned today, those nuances, they make a huge difference.
Huge.
I love it. This has been fantastic. I feel like I learned so much.
Me too. It's been fun.
And hopefully our listeners did as well. So until next time, keep exploring, keep asking those questions, and we'll see you on our next deep dive.